The morning sun painted the streets of London in golden hues as Sergeant Marcus Wellington adjusted his ceremonial red tunic one final time. His polished black boots reflected the early light as he stood before the mirror in his small apartment, preparing for what he believed would be an ordinary day of royal duties. The gleaming brass buttons on his uniform caught the light, each one representing years of dedicated service to the crown. Marcus had been a member of the Queen's Guard for 12 years, and in all that time, he had never imagined that a simple act of respect would lead to a confrontation that would echo through the halls of Buckingham Palace itself. The telegram had arrived 3 days earlier, its yellow paper bearing news that would forever change Marcus's perspective on duty and honor. His childhood friend, Captain James Morrison, had fallen in Afghanistan while leading a rescue mission to save trapped civilians. James had been more than a friend to Marcus. He had been the reason Marcus joined the military in the first place. Growing up in the same neighborhood in Manchester, they had made a pact as teenagers to serve their country together. While James chose the regular army, Marcus found his calling in the ceremonial guards, but their bond had remained unbreakable through years of service. The funeral was scheduled for that afternoon in a small church in Manchester, the same church where both boys had been baptized decades earlier. Marcus had requested leave to attend, but due to a security alert at the palace, all guards were required to remain on duty. The denial of his request had stung deeply, but Marcus understood the importance of his role. However, as he stood in his apartment that morning, looking at the framed photograph of himself and James in their dress uniforms, he made a decision that would set in motion a chain of events no one could have predicted. Marcus decided he would honor his fallen friend in his own way. He would wear his full ceremonial uniform and stand guard at the war memorial near James's family home for exactly 1 hour before the funeral service began. It would be his private tribute, a way to show respect for a man who had died serving others. He reasoned that this small act of remembrance would harm no one and would allow him to return to his duties with a clear conscience. The war memorial was a simple stone monument in a quiet park, dedicated to the fallen soldiers of 2 world wars and recent conflicts. It seemed the perfect place for his silent vigil. As Marcus made his way through the London streets toward the train station, he walked with the precise measured steps that had been drilled into him through years of training. Passers-by stopped to look at the impressive figure he cut in his full dress uniform, complete with the iconic bearskin hat and ceremonial sword. Some tourists even asked for photographs, which he politely declined, explaining that he was on important business. The weight of his decision pressed upon him with each step, but his resolve never wavered. He was doing this for James, for their friendship, and for all the soldiers who had made the ultimate sacrifice. The train journey to Manchester gave Marcus time to reflect on his relationship with James. He remembered their last conversation, just weeks before James's deployment. They had met at a pub near the barracks, and James had spoken passionately about his mission, about the difference he hoped to make in protecting innocent people caught in the crossfire of war. James had always been the more idealistic of the two, driven by a deep sense of justice and compassion for others. Marcus, in contrast, found his purpose in tradition, ceremony, and the quiet dignity of serving the monarchy. Yet both men shared an unwavering commitment to service above self. Arriving in Manchester, Marcus felt the familiar tug of nostalgia as he recognized the streets of his childhood. The industrial city had changed in many ways since he and James had grown up there, but the essential character remained the same. Working-class neighborhoods stretched out from the city center, filled with people who understood the value of hard work and sacrifice. These were the people James had died protecting, and these were the people Marcus served, even if his service took a different form. The war memorial stood in a small park surrounded by terraced houses, their red brick facades weathered by decades of Manchester rain. As Marcus approached the monument, he could see fresh flowers already placed at its base, evidence of a community that never forgot its heroes. The memorial itself was simple but dignified, bearing the names of local men and women who had given their lives in service to their country. Marcus found a spot directly in front of the central stone and assumed the position of attention. His back straight, his eyes fixed on the horizon, his hands at his sides in perfect military bearing. The first few minutes of his vigil passed in peaceful silence. A few local residents noticed the impressive figure of the guardsman and nodded respectfully as they passed. An elderly woman walking her dog paused to place additional flowers at the memorial's base, whispering a quiet "thank you" to Marcus before continuing on her way. Children playing in the nearby playground stopped their games to stare in wonder at the red-coated soldier, standing so perfectly still. For Marcus, these moments felt exactly right, a fitting tribute to his fallen friend and all those who had made similar sacrifices. However, as his vigil continued, Marcus became aware of a police car that had pulled up at the edge of the park. Two officers sat inside, speaking into their radio and occasionally glancing in his direction. Marcus maintained his position, assuming they were simply curious about the unusual sight of a royal guardsman standing alone at a local war memorial. He had no way of knowing that a concerned citizen had reported what they believed to be a security threat, describing a suspicious person in military uniform who had been standing motionless for an extended period. In an age of heightened security awareness, such reports were taken seriously, and the local police were obligated to investigate. The officers finally emerged from their vehicle and approached Marcus with cautious professionalism. They had no way of knowing that they were about to interrupt a deeply personal act of remembrance, or that their actions would soon capture the attention of the highest levels of government and royalty alike. Constable David Thompson had been walking his beat for nearly 15 years, and in all that time he had never encountered anything quite like the scene before him at the war memorial. The call had come in 30 minutes earlier from a worried resident who reported seeing a man in military uniform standing completely motionless in the park for an unusually long time. In the current climate of security concerns, such reports required immediate investigation, regardless of how routine they might seem. Thompson's partner, Constable Sarah Mitchell, was relatively new to the force, having joined just 2 years prior, but she approached every situation with careful attention to protocol and procedure. As they walked across the grass toward the imposing figure of Marcus in his full ceremonial dress, Thompson felt a mixture of curiosity and professional caution. The man before them was clearly a member of the Queen's Guard, evidenced by the distinctive red tunic, black trousers with red stripe, and the iconic bearskin hat. Everything about his appearance was regulation perfect, from the shine on his boots to the precise positioning of his white gloves. Yet his presence here, alone and seemingly without official purpose, raised questions that needed answers. "Excuse me, sir," Thompson called out as they approached within speaking distance. Marcus remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed straight ahead in the traditional guard position. This was standard protocol for ceremonial guards, who were trained not to break position except under specific circumstances. However, the two constables were unaware of these traditions and interpreted his silence as potentially suspicious or uncooperative behavior. Constable Mitchell stepped forward, her hand resting casually near her radio. "Sir, we need to speak with you. Can you please turn around and identify yourself?" she asked in a clear, authoritative voice. Still, Marcus maintained his position. His training had taught him that breaking ceremonial stance required either a direct order from a superior officer or a genuine emergency. He was unsure how to handle this situation, as his current vigil was unofficial, yet he felt bound by the same standards of conduct that governed his official duties. The silence stretched for several long moments, creating tension that neither party had intended. Thompson exchanged a glance with his partner, both of them recognizing that they were dealing with something outside their normal experience. The guardsman's perfect posture and ceremonial bearing suggested official business, yet they had received no notification of any royal or military events scheduled for the area. The local police station had not been informed of any ceremonial activities, and there was no security detail or crowd control in place. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time to respond," Thompson said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "We've received reports about your presence here, and we need to verify your identification and purpose. If you don't cooperate, we'll have to consider you a potential security risk." The words hung in the air as Marcus wrestled with his decision. He knew that speaking would break his ceremonial stance, but he also understood that the officers were simply doing their job and had legitimate concerns about his unauthorized presence. Finally, Marcus made the difficult choice to break his position. He turned slowly to face the two constables, his movements precise and controlled, even as he abandoned his ceremonial stance. "Good afternoon, officers," he said in a clear, respectful voice. I am Sergeant Marcus Wellington of Her Majesty's Coldstream Guards. I apologize for any concern my presence may have caused. He reached slowly into his tunic pocket, careful to telegraph his movements to avoid any misunderstanding, and withdrew his military identification card. Thompson examined the identification carefully, while Mitchell observed Marcus's demeanor and body language. Everything about the man suggested legitimate military service, from his bearing to his speech patterns to the authentic details of his uniform. However, questions remained about why he was here, alone and apparently without official authorization. "Sergeant Wellington," Thompson said, returning the identification. "Can you explain why you're here in full dress uniform? Are you on official duty?" The question struck at the heart of Marcus's dilemma. He was not on official duty, having been denied leave to attend his friend's funeral. His presence here was entirely personal, motivated by grief and a desire to honor a fallen comrade. Yet he was wearing his official uniform and conducting himself according to military protocol. He took a deep breath before responding, knowing that his honesty might lead to complications but unwilling to deceive the officers who were simply trying to do their job. "Officers, I must be completely honest with you," Marcus began, his voice steady despite the emotional weight of his words. "I am not here on official duty. I am honoring the memory of my childhood friend, Captain James Morrison, who was killed in action in Afghanistan 3 days ago. His funeral is this afternoon, and I was denied leave to attend due to security requirements at the palace. This memorial seemed an appropriate place for me to pay my respects before his service begins." The explanation transformed the entire dynamic of the encounter. Both constables could hear the genuine emotion in Marcus's voice and could see the pain in his eyes as he spoke of his friend's death. This was not a security threat or a person acting suspiciously. This was a soldier mourning a fallen comrade in the only way he knew how. Thompson felt a wave of sympathy for the guardsman, recognizing the difficult position he had placed himself in by choosing personal loyalty over strict adherence to military regulations. However, sympathy could not override the realities of police procedure and public safety concerns. Mitchell spoke up, her voice gentler than before but still professional. "Sergeant, we understand your situation and we respect your desire to honor your friend. However, your presence here in full military dress without official authorization has raised security concerns among local residents. We've received multiple calls about you, and we have protocols we must follow." Marcus nodded, understanding their position completely. He had known when he made his decision that there might be consequences, but his need to honor James had outweighed his concerns about potential complications. "I understand, officers. What do you need me to do?" he asked, prepared to accept whatever consequences his actions might bring. Thompson looked at his partner, both of them recognizing that they were dealing with an unusual situation that didn't fit neatly into their standard procedures. The man before them was clearly not a threat, but his unauthorized presence in military dress had created a public safety concern that they couldn't simply ignore. They needed to find a solution that balanced their professional obligations with compassion for a grieving soldier who had made a questionable but understandable choice. "Sergeant Wellington," Thompson said finally, "I'm afraid we're going to have to ask you to come with us to the station so we can sort this out properly. We'll need to contact your superior officers to verify your story and determine the appropriate next steps. I want you to know that we understand your motivations, but we have procedures we must follow." The words were spoken with genuine regret, as both officers could see that their intervention was causing additional pain to a man who was already suffering from the loss of his friend. The ride to Manchester Central Police Station passed in uncomfortable silence, with Marcus sitting in the back of the police car, still wearing his full ceremonial uniform. The red tunic that had filled him with pride just hours earlier now felt like a burden, marking him as someone who had stepped outside the boundaries of military protocol. Through the window, he watched the familiar streets of his childhood pass by, knowing that somewhere in this city, James's family was preparing for a funeral that would begin in less than 2 hours. The weight of his decision pressed heavily upon him, but he felt no regret for attempting to honor his friend's memory. At the police station, Marcus was treated with professional courtesy but firm resolve. The desk sergeant, a veteran officer named Robert Hayes, looked up from his paperwork as the unusual procession entered the building. It wasn't every day that someone brought in a member of the Queen's Guard, and Hayes had to suppress his curiosity while maintaining the proper procedures. "Right then," he said, gesturing toward a private interview room. "Let's get this sorted out properly." Constable Thompson provided a detailed account of the incident while Marcus sat quietly, his hands folded in his lap, his posture still reflecting his military training even in these unusual circumstances. Hayes listened carefully, occasionally glancing at the guardsman who had created such an unexpected situation. The veteran sergeant had served in the military himself years earlier, and could understand the emotional complexity of Marcus's actions, even if he couldn't officially condone them. "Sergeant Wellington," Hayes began, his tone professional but not unsympathetic. "Before we proceed, I need to contact your commanding officer to report this incident and verify your story. Can you provide me with the appropriate contact information?" Marcus nodded and recited the direct phone number for Major Richardson, his immediate superior at Wellington Barracks. He knew that this call would likely end his career, but he accepted that possibility as the price of his decision to honor James's memory. The phone call that followed would later be described by Major Richardson as one of the most difficult conversations of his military career. Hayes explained the situation clearly and professionally, describing how they had found Marcus conducting an unauthorized vigil at a local war memorial while wearing his full dress uniform. Richardson listened in stunned silence, unable to believe that one of his most reliable and disciplined soldiers had placed himself in such a compromising position. "Sergeant Wellington has been with us for 12 years, Richardson told Hayes, his voice heavy with disappointment and concern. "He's never given us a moment's trouble before this. His record is exemplary in every respect." The major paused, gathering his thoughts before continuing. "However, what he's done is a serious breach of military protocol. He's wearing the Queen's uniform without authorization and has left his assigned duties without permission. I'll need to send someone to collect him immediately." As they waited for military transportation to arrive, Marcus was allowed to make one phone call. Without hesitation, he called James's mother, Mrs. Morrison, to explain why he wouldn't be able to attend the funeral service. The conversation was brief but heartbreaking, with the grieving mother thanking Marcus for his attempt to honor her son's memory, while also expressing concern for the consequences he might face. James would understand, she told him through her tears. "He always said you were the most honorable man he knew. Don't let this destroy what you've built, Marcus. James wouldn't want that." Her words provided some comfort, but Marcus knew that his career was likely over and that his actions had created complications that would extend far beyond his personal situation. Word of the incident had already begun to spread through unofficial channels within the military community. Text messages and phone calls carried the story from person to person, creating a buzz of speculation and concern. Some viewed Marcus's actions as a touching tribute to a fallen friend, while others saw them as a serious breach of discipline that could not be overlooked. The story grew more complex with each retelling, but the basic facts remained unchanged. A Royal Guardsman had abandoned his post to honor a friend and had been arrested for his efforts. Captain Reynolds, the duty officer sent to collect Marcus, arrived at the police station with mixed emotions. He had served alongside Marcus for several years and respected him both as a soldier and as a person. The drive back to London was conducted in relative silence, with both men understanding the gravity of the situation and the uncertain future that lay ahead. Reynolds had been instructed to escort Marcus directly to Major Richardson's office, where a formal inquiry would begin immediately. The military police were already waiting when they arrived at Wellington Barracks. Marcus was formally placed under arrest and informed that he would face a court-martial for being absent without leave, wearing military uniform without authorization, and bringing the service into potential disrepute. The charges were serious and could result in dismissal from service, reduction in rank, and even imprisonment. As he was led away to the guardhouse, Marcus caught sight of his fellow guardsmen preparing for the evening ceremony, their faces reflecting a mixture of sympathy and concern for their colleague's fate. Meanwhile, back in Manchester, James Morrison's funeral proceeded as planned, though many of the attendees were aware of Marcus's absence and the circumstances surrounding it. The service was attended by family, friends, and several of James's military colleagues who had been granted leave to attend. The chaplain spoke movingly about James's courage and sacrifice, describing how he had died while leading a rescue mission to save civilian lives in a dangerous area of Afghanistan. The congregation sang hymns and shared memories of a young man who had embodied the best qualities of military service and personal integrity. As the funeral cortege made its way to the cemetery, word of Marcus's situation had begun to reach some of the attendees through social media and text messages. James's younger brother, Michael, who was also serving in the army, felt a deep sense of injustice about the treatment his brother's friend was receiving. James would be furious, he told his father quietly. Marcus was just trying to do the right thing to show respect. How can they punish someone for that? The story might have ended there, with Marcus facing military justice for his unauthorized tribute and James being laid to rest without his childhood friend's presence. However, unknown to everyone involved, the incident had already been reported to higher levels of government through routine police channels. A brief mention of the arrest of a royal guardsman had been included in the daily security briefing that was distributed to various government departments, including the Home Office and, ultimately, the private secretary to the king himself. By evening, as Marcus sat in the guardhouse contemplating his uncertain future, and James's family returned home from the cemetery, the story had reached the desk of someone who would see it not as a breach of protocol, but as an act of human decency that deserved recognition rather than punishment. The wheels of justice and compassion were about to turn in ways that none of the participants could have imagined, setting the stage for a response that would transform a potential tragedy into a powerful statement about honor, friendship, and the true meaning of service. Sir William Hartwell had served as the king's private secretary for nearly a decade, and in that time, he had developed an acute ability to distinguish between routine matters and those that required the monarch's personal attention. As he reviewed the morning briefings in his office at Buckingham Palace, the report about the arrest of Sergeant Marcus Wellington caught his eye not because of its security implications, but because of its human dimension. The brief summary described a royal guardsman who had been detained while conducting an unauthorized memorial service for a fallen friend. And something about the story resonated deeply with Sir William's understanding of his monarch's character and values. King Charles had always shown a particular sensitivity to matters involving military service and personal sacrifice. Throughout his years as Prince of Wales, he had made countless visits to military installations, attended memorial services, and personally met with families of fallen soldiers. Sir William knew that the king would want to understand the full circumstances behind this unusual incident before any final decisions were made about the guardsman's fate. Rather than allowing the matter to proceed through normal military channels without royal awareness, Sir William decided to investigate further. The private secretary's first call was to Major Richardson at Wellington Barracks, where Marcus was being held pending his court-martial. Richardson provided a complete account of the incident, including Marcus's exemplary service record and his genuine grief over the loss of his friend. "Sir William," the major explained, "Sergeant Wellington has been one of our most reliable men for 12 years. He's never so much as been late for duty, let alone absent without leave. This was completely out of character, driven by his desire to honor a friend who died serving his country in Afghanistan." Sir William listened carefully, taking detailed notes as Richardson described both the technical violations of military protocol and the deeply personal motivations behind Marcus's actions. The major's tone suggested that while he was bound by regulation to pursue disciplinary action, he personally sympathized with the guardsman's situation and regretted the necessity of formal proceedings. This nuanced perspective helped Sir William understand that the case involved competing values: military discipline on one side and human compassion on the other. The next call was to Constable Thompson in Manchester, who provided additional context about the arrest and Marcus's behavior throughout the incident. "He was completely cooperative once we explained the situation," Thompson reported. "You could see he was genuinely grieving and his respect for his friend was obvious. He wasn't trying to cause trouble or make any kind of statement. He just wanted to pay his respects, in the only way he knew how." This additional perspective reinforced Sir William's growing conviction that the king needed to be informed about this case personally. As Sir William prepared his briefing for the king, he also took the liberty of conducting some research into Captain James Morrison, the fallen soldier whom Marcus had been attempting to honor. The official records painted a picture of an exemplary officer who had volunteered for multiple dangerous assignments and had died while leading a rescue mission to extract civilian contractors from a compound under attack. James's commanding officer in Afghanistan spoke glowingly of his courage and selflessness, describing him as the kind of soldier who always put others before himself, even when it meant personal risk. That afternoon, Sir William requested a private audience with King Charles in the monarch's study, a comfortable room lined with books and personal memorabilia that served as the setting for many important conversations. The king listened intently as his private secretary outlined the case, occasionally asking questions about specific details and the personalities involved. As the briefing concluded, King Charles sat quietly for several minutes, clearly moved by the story and contemplating the appropriate response. "William," the king said finally, his voice reflecting deep thoughtfulness, "this young man was willing to risk his career to honor a friend who died serving others. That speaks to the kind of character and loyalty we should be encouraging, not punishing. Yes, he broke protocol, but he did so for the most honorable of reasons." The king paused, looking out the window toward the courtyard, where other guardsmen were conducting their duties, with the same precision and dedication that Marcus had shown throughout his career. "I want to understand more about this situation before any irreversible decisions are made," the king continued. "Can you arrange for Major Richardson to delay the court-martial proceedings temporarily? And I'd like to speak with Sergeant Wellington personally, if that can be arranged appropriately." Sir William nodded, knowing that such a request from the monarch would carry significant weight throughout the military hierarchy, even if it was presented as a suggestion rather than a direct order. The call to Major Richardson later that afternoon created a stir of activity at Wellington Barracks. The request for a temporary stay of proceedings, coupled with the possibility of a personal audience with the king, transformed the entire dynamic of Marcus's case. Word spread quickly through the military community that this was no longer a routine disciplinary matter, but something that had captured the personal attention of the monarch himself. Guards who had been whispering about the incident in hushed tones now spoke openly about their respect for Marcus's motivations, even if they questioned his methods. Marcus himself was informed of these developments by Major Richardson, who visited him in the guardhouse that evening. The major's demeanor had changed noticeably from their earlier interactions, reflecting the new gravity and complexity of the situation. "Sergeant Wellington," Richardson began, choosing his words carefully, "it appears that your case has come to the attention of His Majesty's private secretary, and there's a possibility that the king himself may wish to speak with you about this matter." The news left Marcus stunned and overwhelmed. In his 12 years of service, he had stood guard while the king passed by on numerous occasions, but the thought of a personal conversation with the monarch was almost incomprehensible. "Sir," he managed to respond, "I never intended for this to become such a significant matter. I was just trying to honor James's memory." Richardson nodded understandingly, recognizing that Marcus was still processing the potential implications of royal interest in his case. "Sergeant," Richardson replied, "sometimes actions that seem simple on the surface touch on deeper principles that matter greatly to our superiors. Your loyalty to your friend and your willingness to accept consequences for your actions may have demonstrated exactly the kind of character that our service values most highly." The major's words carried hope, but both men understood that the outcome remained uncertain and would depend on conversations and decisions taking place at the highest levels of government and monarchy. As word of the king's interest spread beyond military circles, the story began to attract attention from other quarters as well. Social media posts about the guardsman who was arrested while honoring a fallen friend started to circulate, generating public sympathy and support for Marcus's situation. Veterans organizations expressed solidarity with his motivations, while military families shared similar stories of sacrifice and loyalty that resonated with the basic human elements of the case. The transformation of Marcus's situation from a routine disciplinary matter to a case of royal interest reflected the power of individual actions to touch on universal themes of friendship, loyalty, and honor. What had begun as a personal tribute to a fallen friend had evolved into something much larger, involving questions about the nature of duty, the importance of compassion, and the balance between following rules and following one's conscience. The stage was now set for a resolution that would either vindicate Marcus's actions or serve as a cautionary tale about the consequences of placing personal loyalty above institutional obligations. The morning of Marcus's scheduled audience with the king dawned clear and crisp, with autumn sunlight filtering through the windows of Buckingham Palace as staff prepared for what many considered an extraordinary meeting. Sir William Hartwell had spent considerable time determining the appropriate protocol for such an unusual situation, ultimately deciding that the audience would be informal and private, conducted in the king's study rather than in any of the grand staterooms. The goal was to create an atmosphere where genuine conversation could take place, rather than the formal exchanges that characterized most royal audiences. Marcus had been escorted from Wellington Barracks by Major Richardson, who remained visibly nervous about the unprecedented nature of the situation. Throughout his military career, Richardson had never known of a case where a soldier facing disciplinary action had been granted a personal audience with the monarch to discuss the circumstances. The drive through London's streets gave Marcus time to reflect on how dramatically his life had changed since that morning when he had decided to honor James's memory. He wore his dress uniform, cleaned and pressed to perfection, though without the ceremonial sword and other elements that had marked his unauthorized vigil. Upon arrival at the palace, Marcus was struck by the familiar surroundings that he had guarded for so many years, yet which he was now entering under completely different circumstances. The corridors he had walked as a sentry now led him toward a conversation that could determine not only his future, but also set a precedent for how the military balanced discipline with compassion. Sir William met them personally, his presence indicating the importance the royal household placed on this meeting. "Sergeant Wellington," Sir William said as they walked toward the king's study, "His Majesty has asked me to emphasize that this is a conversation, not a formal inquiry. He's genuinely interested in understanding your perspective and the circumstances that led to your actions." The private secretary's words were intended to ease Marcus's nerves, but the weight of the situation remained overwhelming for a man who had never expected to find himself in such circumstances. The king's study was smaller and more comfortable than Marcus had imagined, filled with personal photographs, books, and memorabilia that reflected a life of service and dedication. King Charles rose from behind his desk as Marcus entered, his expression warm but serious, clearly recognizing the gravity of the situation for all involved. "Please sit down, Sergeant Wellington," the king said, gesturing toward a comfortable chair positioned across from his desk. "I've been hoping to have this conversation with you." What followed was unlike any interaction Marcus had ever experienced with authority figures. The king began by expressing his condolences for the loss of Captain Morrison, acknowledging the pain that came with losing a close friend in military service. "I understand that you and Captain Morrison grew up together and had maintained your friendship throughout your military careers," the king said, his voice reflecting genuine sympathy. The loss of such a friend must be particularly difficult to bear. Marcus found himself able to speak openly about his relationship with James, describing their childhood friendship and their shared commitment to military service. He explained how James had chosen the regular army while he had found his calling in ceremonial duties, but how their bond had remained strong despite their different paths. "Your Majesty," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the emotion behind his words, "James was the kind of person who always put others first. When I heard he had died trying to save civilians, it didn't surprise me, but it made his loss even more difficult to accept." The king listened intently, occasionally asking questions that demonstrated his genuine interest in understanding both Marcus's motivations and the character of the friend he had sought to honor. "Tell me about your decision to conduct a memorial vigil," the king requested. "What led you to choose that particular way of paying your respects?" The question allowed Marcus to explain his thought process, describing how the denial of his leave request had prompted him to seek an alternative way of honoring James's memory. "I knew it was outside of normal protocol," Marcus admitted, "but I felt that James deserved some form of tribute from his oldest friend. The war memorial seemed appropriate, and I thought that standing guard there for an hour would be a fitting way to show respect for his sacrifice and for all the soldiers who had given their lives in service to others." The king nodded thoughtfully, clearly understanding the emotional logic behind the decision, even as he recognized the complications it had created. The conversation then turned to Marcus's experience with the police and his subsequent arrest. The king was particularly interested in how Marcus had handled the situation, noting that all reports indicated complete cooperation and honest explanation of his actions, despite the potential consequences. "Sergeant Wellington," the king observed, "it's clear that you understood the risks of your decision but chose to proceed anyway. That suggests a strong conviction about the importance of honoring your friend's memory." As their discussion continued, the king shared his own perspective on military service and the bonds that form between soldiers. He spoke about his experiences meeting with military families and his understanding of the unique loyalties that develop within the armed forces. "The military asks its members to put duty above personal interest," the king noted. "But it's important to remember that duty encompasses not just following orders but also maintaining the values and relationships that make service meaningful." The conversation gradually shifted toward the broader implications of Marcus's case and its potential impact on military culture and public perception. The king was clearly aware that his response to the situation would send a message about the values he expected from those who served the crown, and he wanted to ensure that his decision reflected both the importance of discipline and the recognition of human compassion and loyalty. "Sergeant Wellington," the king said as their meeting approached its conclusion, "I want you to know that I don't view your actions as a simple case of insubordination. What you did was motivated by love for a friend and respect for his sacrifice. Those are qualities we should encourage, not punish, even when they lead to decisions that complicate military protocol." The words offered hope, though Marcus understood that the final resolution would require careful consideration of multiple factors and competing interests. As Marcus prepared to leave, the king made one final observation that would stay with the sergeant long after their meeting ended. "The strength of our military has always come not just from discipline and training, but from the personal bonds and shared values that bind soldiers together. Your friendship with Captain Morrison and your desire to honor his memory represent the best of those traditions. Whatever decisions are made about your case, I want you to know that your loyalty and dedication have been recognized and appreciated," the audience concluded, with the king expressing his intention to discuss the matter further with his advisors and military leadership. Marcus left the palace with a sense of hope but also with the understanding that his fate remained uncertain. The conversation had been more positive than he had dared to expect, but he knew that royal sympathy did not automatically translate into official clemency. The king's words had shown understanding and appreciation for his motivations, but the final resolution would require balancing those sentiments with the practical requirements of military discipline and public policy. The days following Marcus's audience with the king were filled with intense discussions within the highest levels of military command and royal administration. Sir William Hartwell found himself at the center of these deliberations, coordinating between the monarch's wishes and the practical requirements of military justice. The king had made his sympathies clear, but translating those feelings into appropriate action required careful consideration of precedent, protocol, and the broader implications for military discipline. Major Richardson received a call from the Ministry of Defense 3 days after the royal audience, informing him that the case had been escalated to the highest levels of military command. General Sir Marcus Thompson, the chief of the General Staff, had personally reviewed the file and was working with the king's representatives to determine an appropriate resolution. This level of involvement was unprecedented for what had begun as a relatively straightforward disciplinary matter, but the unique circumstances and royal interest had transformed it into something much more significant. Meanwhile, public awareness of Marcus's situation had grown considerably through social media and news coverage. Veterans organizations across the country had begun organizing support campaigns, arguing that punishing a soldier for honoring a fallen friend would send the wrong message about military values. Online petitions gathered thousands of signatures from current and former service members who identified with Marcus's desire to pay respects to his friend, even if they questioned his methods. The story had touched a nerve within the military community and among the general public, creating pressure for a resolution that would acknowledge both the importance of discipline and the value of loyalty. The breakthrough came during a private meeting between the king and General Thompson, where they discussed not just Marcus's specific case but the broader questions it raised about military culture and the treatment of exceptional circumstances. The king expressed his belief that true military leadership required the wisdom to distinguish between harmful insubordination and actions motivated by honor and loyalty. "General," the king observed, "we must ask ourselves what kind of message we want to send about the values we expect from our soldiers. Do we want them to be mindless followers of orders, or do we want them to be thinking, caring individuals who understand the deeper purposes of their service?" General Thompson, a career military officer with deep respect for both tradition and innovation, found himself in agreement with the monarch's perspective. "Your Majesty," he replied, "Sergeant Wellington's record suggests that his actions were aberrant only in their specific nature, not in their underlying motivation. His dedication to duty and his respect for fallen comrades are exactly the qualities we want to see in our soldiers. The challenge is finding a way to acknowledge that while maintaining the discipline that makes our forces effective." The solution they developed was both creative and precedent-setting. Rather than proceeding with a traditional court-martial that could result in Marcus's dismissal from service, they would implement what became known as the Morrison Protocol, named in honor of the fallen captain whose death had initiated the entire sequence of events. Under this new framework, soldiers who committed minor disciplinary infractions while attempting to honor fallen comrades would be eligible for alternative resolutions that emphasized education and service, rather than punishment. For Marcus specifically, the resolution involved several components that balanced accountability with recognition of his positive motivations. He would receive an official reprimand for being absent without leave and wearing his uniform without authorization, acknowledging that his actions had violated military protocol. However, this reprimand would be accompanied by a commendation for his 12 years of exemplary service and his demonstration of loyalty and friendship. The combination would remain on his record, but would not prevent future promotions or assignments. More significantly, Marcus would be assigned to a new role within the royal household, serving as a liaison between the palace and military families dealing with loss and trauma. This position would allow him to channel his empathy and understanding into official duties that supported others facing similar challenges. The king personally approved this assignment, seeing it as a way to turn Marcus's difficult experience into an opportunity to help others while maintaining his military career. The announcement of this resolution was made jointly by Buckingham Palace and the Ministry of Defense, with both organizations emphasizing their commitment to supporting military personnel while maintaining appropriate discipline. The statement praised Marcus's dedication to his friend's memory, while acknowledging that proper channels should have been followed. It also announced the establishment of new policies that would provide clearer guidance for soldiers seeking to participate in memorial activities for fallen comrades. The response from the military community and the general public was overwhelmingly positive. Veterans groups praised the decision as showing proper understanding of military values, while active duty personnel expressed appreciation for leadership that could distinguish between harmful disobedience and actions motivated by honor. The Morrison family issued a statement through their solicitor expressing gratitude for the recognition of their son's sacrifice and satisfaction that his friend's loyalty had been acknowledged rather than punished. For Marcus himself, the resolution brought both relief and a renewed sense of purpose. The new assignment would allow him to continue serving while honoring the memory of James and other fallen soldiers in a more constructive way. His first official duty in his new role was to attend a memorial service for recent military casualties, where he met with families and shared his understanding of loss and the importance of remembrance. The experience confirmed that his difficult journey had led him to exactly where he needed to be. The case established important precedents for how the military would handle similar situations in the future. The Morrison Protocol became a model for addressing cases where good intentions led to questionable decisions, providing alternatives to traditional punishment that could preserve careers while maintaining discipline. Military legal officers began receiving training on how to identify cases where alternative resolutions might be appropriate, always with the understanding that each situation would be evaluated on its individual merits. 6 months later, Marcus stood once again in his dress uniform, but this time he was participating in an official ceremony at Westminster Abbey, honoring all military personnel who had died in recent conflicts. As he watched the families of the fallen receive recognition for their loved ones' sacrifice, He thought about James and the chain of events that had brought him to this moment. What had begun as a simple desire to honor a friend had evolved into something much larger, creating positive changes that would benefit military families for years to come. The story of Marcus Wellington and his tribute to Captain James Morrison became part of military folklore, told in barracks and training schools as an example of how loyalty and honor could triumph, even in difficult circumstances. It demonstrated that true leadership sometimes required the courage to look beyond rules and regulations, to understand the human heart that motivates service and sacrifice. Most importantly, it showed that doing the right thing, even when it carries personal risk, can lead to outcomes that benefit not just individuals but entire communities of people who share common values and commitments. Years later, when Marcus retired from military service with full honors, the ceremony included a special recognition of his contributions to supporting military families during their most difficult times. The king himself attended the ceremony, personally thanking Marcus for his service and for the example he had set of turning personal adversity into an opportunity to serve others. It was a fitting conclusion to a career that had been marked by both dedication to duty and unwavering loyalty to the bonds of friendship that make military service meaningful.